Have you ever really looked at the portraits of 15th century aristocrats? Not just glanced over them, but truly examined the details. These incredible fabrics that practically glow on the canvas. Shimmering silk, deep velvet, brocade embroidered with gold. Lacework so intricate it seems like the artist must have invented it. But no, all of this existed in reality. People wore it, danced in it, received ambassadors in it, and shaped the destinies of empires. Take a close look at these fabrics. The complexity of the patterns, the richness of the colors, the way the material drapes and flows. Now, engage your brain and ask yourself a simple question. Where did it all come from? We've been told a beautiful fairy tale our whole lives about manufactories and weaving looms, about hardworking craftsmen and trade secrets. Historians repeat the same mantra like a memorized prayer. The growth of trade, the flourishing of industry, technological progress. It sounds logical, doesn't it? It sounds so convincing that we don't even think to verify it. But dig a little deeper, start calculating, cross-reference the facts, and the whole pretty picture starts to crack at the seams. Today, we're going to talk about something museums and history textbooks prefer to ignore. The textile paradox that upends everything you thought you knew about the so-called gallant age. Let's start with the basics, with math that, for some reason, no one has bothered to crunch. A single formal gown for an aristocratic lady required 15 to 25 meters of fabric. That's no exaggeration. It's documented in tailors' accounts. Crinolines, panniers, multi-layered skirts, trains several meters long. All of it demanded an unbelievable amount of material. Catherine de' Medici, according to surviving records, owned 405 dresses. Marie Antoinette changed outfits 4 times a day, and her wardrobe was replenished with hundreds of new items each year. Elizabeth Petrovna left behind 15,000 dresses after her death. Wrap your head around that number, 15,000. And that's just one court, one country. Now multiply it by all the royal houses of Europe, by ducal and comital families, by court ladies, by wealthy merchants, by everyone who wanted to look respectable. It turns out that just for the aristocracy of France alone, millions of meters of expensive fabrics were needed annually. Millions of meters of silk, velvet, brocade. Every year, year after year, for decades. Now here's the question that shatters the official narrative. Where was it all woven? Textbooks show us engravings of weaving workshops where masters sit at wooden looms. This picturesque, atmospheric, but utterly unrealistic in terms of production volumes. A single weaver on a manual loom from that era could produce at most 2 to 3 meters of quality fabric per day. That's assuming they worked from dawn to dusk without breaks. For one dress, you'd need 20 meters, meaning a week's non-stop labor. For a single aristocrat's wardrobe of 300 dresses, that's 6,000 meters of fabric. One weaver would take nearly 10 years to produce it, but dresses weren't worn for decades. Fashion changed every season. Fabrics wore out. Plus, you had to clothe not one woman, but thousands, tens of thousands across Europe. Even if you imagine hundreds of thousands of weavers working around the clock, the arithmetic reveals the absurdity. The calculations fall apart at the first attempt to check them, but volumes are just the tip of the iceberg. The real intrigue begins when we talk about quality. Visit any costume museum and study the surviving samples of 15th century fabrics that have miraculously endured to our day. These materials have survived 300 years, multiple wars, revolutions, fires, and they still look stunning. The colors haven't faded, the threads haven't rotted, the patterns are as crisp as if they were woven yesterday. Modern synthetics disintegrate in 50 years. Our best fabrics lose their luster after a few washes. Yet these materials lay in chests for 300 years under far from ideal conditions and remain virtually unchanged. The weave density in some samples is such that modern factories achieve it only with computerized, high-precision looms. The durability of the dyes is a story unto itself, one we'll return to. But it's already clear, this isn't just fabric. This is technology we've either lost or been lied to about from the start. Let's talk about color, because here the official history hits a complete dead end. Tyrian purple, used to dye fabrics for royalty, was extracted from sea snails. To get 1 gram of dye, you had to process 10,000 snails, 1 gram, and dyeing one dress required kilograms. Carmine, the red dye from cochineal insects, took 70,000 bugs per pound. Indigo was shipped from India via caravans that traveled for months across deserts and oceans. And here's the astonishing part. These dyes lasted for centuries, didn't fade in the sun, didn't bleed in the wash. Modern chemical industries, with their labs and synthetics, create dyes that fade in a couple of years, and attempts to recreate ancient natural recipes have failed. Even with the formulas, we can't achieve the same permanence. They, with their primitive cauldrons and wooden vats, created dyes surpassing anything available to us with our technologies. Seriously, this isn't mastery, it's something else. Now imagine the logistics of this madness. Silk was transported from China over 6 months via caravan routes through deserts, mountains, bandit territories. Purple from the Mediterranean, indigo from India, carmine from Mexico. Gold threads required gold, silver threads silver. All of it had to be delivered, stored, processed, woven, dyed, sewn. Where were the warehouses? Where are the customs documents for such import volumes? In the French archives of the 15th century, there's no record of importing millions of meters of raw silk, which would have been necessary just to supply the Versailles court. No documents about massive dyeing manufactories processing tons of dyes. No evidence of trading fleets shuttling exclusively with fabrics. It's like saying, we built 1,000 skyscrapers, but forgetting to note where the concrete came from. The information simply doesn't exist, as if someone deliberately scrubbed it from all archives. Or perhaps it never existed because that trade on the required scale simply never happened. And now for the most chilling part, the technology for creating patterns. The jacquard fabrics worn in the 15th century have such intricate ornamentation that producing them requires programming a loom. Joseph Marie Jacquard officially invented his punch card loom only in 1804, and it's considered a revolution in weaving. But fabrics with similar pattern complexity existed 100 years earlier. Double-sided brocades where the design matches perfectly on both sides. Geometrically precise ornaments repeating flawlessly over dozens of meters. Creating this by hand is physically impossible. The human eye and hand aren't capable of such precision. Modern museum experts, studying these fabrics under microscopes, throw up their hands. Replicating it manually is impossible. It requires machine accuracy or a technology we have no idea about. But academic science sticks to its line. Everything was done by serfs on wooden looms by candlelight. Or maybe Jacquard just copied what he found in old storerooms. Maybe his invention was reverse engineering of artifacts from a past civilization. The gold and silver threads in 15th century fabrics are a whole separate story that historians prefer to sidestep. These aren't just gilded or silvered fibers. They're genuine ultra-thin metal threads woven into the fabric. The technology for creating them involves drawing metal into wire as thin as a human hair, then flattening and wrapping it with silk or linen. The process is so complex that even today it's done on specialized equipment. Yet, in the 15th century, according to the official version, this was produced artisanally in volumes that embroidered thousands of dresses across Europe. Where did the metal come from? France's gold reserves would have melted away if they truly used it for fabrics in such quantities. But the economy didn't collapse, the gold didn't vanish, and the dresses kept shining with precious gleam. And since we're talking about gold and economics, let's look at the financial side of this insanity. A single formal dress cost as much as a prosperous peasant's annual income. An average aristocrat's wardrobe was valued at a sum that could buy a small estate. An empress's wardrobe? The budget of an entire province. Yet fabrics weren't passed down as heirlooms like the greatest treasures. They weren't hoarded for centuries. Fashion changed, old dresses were remade, fabrics discarded or given to servants. This was disposable luxury on a scale modern economies would call madness. If you calculate the total cost of all fabrics used by European aristocracy just in the 15th century, you get a figure comparable to the GDP of several modern nations. And here's the kicker. In some years, French nobility spending on fabrics exceeded the country's military budget. More than on the army, navy, fortress construction. They spent more on rags than on defending the empire. And yet the economy didn't collapse. The country didn't go bankrupt. Trade flourished. How? The only explanation. The real costs were orders of magnitude lower because the bulk of the fabrics weren't bought. They were taken from somewhere else. Here's what truly doesn't fit in the head. Why have we forgotten how to do this if 15th century technologies were as primitive as they've drilled into us? Why can't modern artisans replicate them? Museums worldwide hold samples of fabrics that experts call unsurpassed. Modern replicas for historical films and theater are pathetic parodies of the originals. Even with computer design and high-precision looms, we don't reach that level. Why have technologies degraded instead of evolved? Where's the logic in humanity inventing electricity and automation, only to weave fabrics worse than serfs did by candlelight? This contradicts the entire concept of technological progress. Any craft with better tools should improve, not simplify. The only explanation that makes sense. We didn't degrade in textiles. We simply never possessed the technology that created these fabrics. It was different from the start, inaccessible to us. There's a theory not discussed in academic circles, but one that explains all these inconsistencies at once. What if the 15th century fabrics weren't produced in those volumes but found? What if aristocrats didn't order the bulk of the material from manufactories, but uncovered warehouses from a previous civilization? Sounds insane, but let's view the facts through that lens. The sudden appearance of massive volumes of high-quality fabrics is easily explained. They were discovered ready-made. The lack of documents on mass production? Because production was minimal for show. The inability to replicate the technology? We don't know how those who came before us created it. The economic paradox. No need to spend fortunes on what you found in basements for free. After some global catastrophe, like the same flood or mudslide that buried the ground floors of buildings across Europe in meters of clay and silt, the survivors began excavating the ruins and found not just buildings and furniture, but warehouses stocked with fabrics. And thanks to the basements being hermetically sealed under layers of clay, the organics were preserved in perfect condition. That's why the fabrics still haven't rotted. The catastrophe itself protected them. Pay attention to the architecture of basement rooms in ancient palaces. Gigantic vaulted halls plunging deep underground, with perfect ventilation and constant temperature. Official history insists these are wine cellars and food storerooms, but the sizes of these spaces are disproportionate even to the needs of the largest court. In many palaces, these basements occupy more area than the above-ground part of the building. Why such volumes for storing wine and grain? But for storing fabrics? Ideal conditions: constant humidity, no light, stable temperature. Fabrics could lie there for centuries without degrading. There are records that upon ascending the throne, new monarchs received keys to royal storerooms whose contents were carefully hidden even from their closest entourage. Catherine II, by some accounts, immediately after her coup demanded a full inventory of all basement rooms in the Winter Palace. What was she searching for? Or already knew she'd find? Perhaps access to these storerooms was the real prize in the power struggles. And what about the manufactories historians love to tout? They existed, that's a fact. But their role was entirely different. These weren't full-fledged production centers, but reprocessing workshops. Old fabrics needed to be refitted to new fashions, repaired, adapted to new owner sizes, pieced together. That's what tailors, embroiderers, and finishers were for. They didn't create fabric from scratch in the required volumes. They worked with ready-made material. Tellingly, documents from those manufactories say very little about raw materials, supplies of raw silk, wool, dyes, but they detail work on recutting, finishing, decorating. This is handling finished product, not mass production. Manufactories were a facade, a cover legend for the fact that the main volumes of fabrics came not from production, but from storerooms. A few workshops produced some fabric for appearance's sake. It was meticulously documented, shown to foreign ambassadors and merchants as proof of might, while the true source of wealth, the underground warehouses, remained a state secret. Look at Peter the Great's reforms through this lens, and much falls into place. Peter forcibly made boyars wear European dress, imposed taxes on traditional Russian clothing, shaved beards. Official version, he wanted to Europeanize Russia, bring it into progress. But what if, in reality, he gained access to warehouses of ready-made European fabrics on Russian territory and needed to legitimize their use? During the Grand Embassy, the Tsar might have received not just shipbuilding knowledge, but maps pointing to underground textile storerooms in major cities. Upon return, he began active excavations under the guise of building a new capital. The mass switch to European costume wasn't a cultural revolution. It was distributing found stockpiles among loyal nobility. Those who wanted to wear traditional clothing were taxed not for backwardness, but because producing it truly required resources and time. European costumes were handed out practically for free because the fabric lay in basements by the ton. Tellingly, it was under Peter that active construction and reconstruction of palaces began, with mandatory deepening of foundations and expansion of basements. Officially for stability, but in reality to reach what lay deeper. Lace deserves a separate discussion because it's technological absurdity squared. Venetian, Brussels, Alasa laces, items of such fineness and complexity that one lacemaker could create just a few centimeters per day. A few centimeters. Yet lace collars, cuffs, entire lace dresses, veils, curtains. These are kilometers of ultrafine work. Creating one lace trim for a dress took years of labor, and it was worn not as the greatest relic passed through generations, but as a regular wardrobe element, changed with fashion, washed, and sometimes simply discarded. If lace was truly handmade in the volumes we see in portraits and museums, it would require hundreds of thousands of lace makers working non-stop for centuries. Where did they live? Who fed them? Where are the cities, the whole lace provinces with million-strong populations? Why no records of such gigantic workshops, guilds of lace makers larger than armies? But the lace exists. It has survived. Its quality remains unmatched even by modern machines. And now the most intriguing part, try getting full access to these fabrics in museums. Most collections are in closed reserves, inaccessible even to researchers without top-level special permission. Requests for independent chemical analysis of dyes, electron microscope study of thread structure, radiocarbon dating, all meet strange resistance and bureaucratic delays. Why? If these are just 15th century fabrics produced in manufactories, what's to hide? But museum curators act as if something lies there that could destroy the entire official historical picture. In 2003, independent experts in the Rothschild private collection gained access to brocade samples cataloged as 1750. Radiocarbon analysis showed the fabric was at least 400 years older than the date. Attempts to publish the results were blocked. The experts lost access to the collection. The data vanished from archives. Chemical analysis of dyes in other samples revealed components that, according to official science, shouldn't have been known in 15th century Europe. These findings aren't published. They're silenced, hidden in classified reports. Now connect the textile paradox with the architectural one, and the picture becomes eerily coherent. We already know about buried ground floors, gigantic buildings with construction technologies inaccessible to that era. And fabrics and architecture are a unified system of one civilization. Palace interiors were completely draped in fabrics. Walls lined with silk, everywhere tapestries, portieres, canopies. This wasn't just decoration, it was part of the room's construction, an element of acoustics and insulation. The architecture was designed with these fabrics in mind from the start. Rooms were created for them. But if the buildings weren't built in the 15th century, but found ready and excavated, then the fabrics were part of the same find. Palaces were unearthed already furnished, with preserved interiors where tapestries hung on walls and chests held kilometers of material. The new owners simply took what they found. Maybe they cleaned, repaired, refitted it to their needs. This explains why the fabric style matches the architecture so perfectly, down to the tiniest ornamental details. They were created together by one civilization, one technology, as parts of a single artistic vision. Then others came, picked up the alien heritage, and for 300 years passed it off as their own. Look closer at the formal portraits, forgetting everything art historians told you. Why did artists so meticulously, with photographic precision, depict every fold of fabric, every thread of gold embroidery, often more detailed than the subject's faces. In some portraits, the fabric is rendered so intricately you can discern individual weave threads, while facial features are blurred or simplified. This isn't just showcasing the artist's skill. It's documenting an artifact. The painter was recording what they considered truly valuable and important. Not the person, but the fabric they wore. They didn't fully understand the technology behind these materials, but sensed it was something exceptional, something to preserve as accurately as possible for posterity. Tellingly, the further from the 15th century, the simpler and coarser the fabrics become in portraits. By the 19th century, we see clear simplification. Quality drops, pattern complexity decreases, detailing diminishes. The stockpiles were running out. What was found in storerooms gradually depleted, wore out, was lost in fires and wars, and they couldn't reproduce a worthy level. That's why deliberate simplicity came into fashion by the late 19th century. Not because the elite wanted it, but because the real past fabrics were gone, and imitating their production quality just wasn't possible. The official history of fabric trade is full of gaping holes. The Great Silk Road, supposedly carrying material from China to Europe, existed for thousands of years. But precisely in the 15th century, when silk consumption reached unprecedented scales, there are no records of caravans on the corresponding size. Where are the Persian customs registries through which this entire flow should have passed? Where are documents about hundreds of annual caravans needed just to supply Europe? Venetian and Genoese trading houses, monopolizing Mediterranean trade, should have handled colossal silk volumes. But their surviving ledgers show figures dozens of times smaller than actual consumption. Where are the ships carrying tons of indigo from India every month? Where are the fleets delivering carmine from New Spain? European naval archives meticulously preserve records of every warship, every gold and spice shipment, insurance sums, and pirate losses. But about textile cargoes on the scale needed for aristocracy? Dead silence. As if that trade in the required volumes never existed, because it didn't. Fabrics weren't brought from across the seas. They were taken from underground, from beneath their own palaces. What happened to those who created these fabrics and the incredible technologies behind them? The same catastrophe that buried city ground floors in meters of clay and silt. A flood, mudslide, planetary-scale landscape change. Call it what you will. The essence remains. A civilization possessing advanced textile production technologies we still can't replicate was destroyed or forced to abandon these territories. What remained? Cities, palaces, warehouses, storerooms stocked with tons of finished product. After some time, perhaps decades, others arrived, those we now know as 15th century aristocracy. They found cities full of treasures, including massive fabric stockpiles in pristine condition thanks to hermetic sealing under clay layers. The great divvying up of the found began. Whoever gained control of the largest warehouses was declared king or emperor. The scale of the discovered wealth directly determined one's place in the new power hierarchy. Hence the sudden emergence of dynasties from nowhere and brutal conflicts over territories that, at first glance, lacked strategic value. That's where the major storerooms were. For the next 150 years, humanity methodically consumed this legacy, gradually forgetting its true origins and inventing ever more elaborate tales about manufactories, crafts, and their own grandeur. We live in a world where official history is a lacework of lies with a million holes, through which a completely different reality peeks. The 15th century textile paradox is just one thread. Pull it and you can unravel the entire construct. The dresses and doublets of that era aren't just clothing. They're tangible evidence of a civilization whose technologies surpassed everything we have today. Every surviving meter of silk, every lace, every gold thread screams, it wasn't like that. But the education system, museums, academic science keep pushing their narrative, ignoring math, logic, and common sense. It's easier for them to believe the fairy tale about diligent weavers than to admit that the history of recent centuries is a rewritten myth about looters who plundered the warehouses of a perished civilization. You don't have to believe me. In fact, I urge you to doubt everything, including my words. But before dismissing it, do one simple thing. Grab a calculator, Figure the meters of fabric per dress, multiply by the number of dresses, add the production time for one weaver. The numbers won't add up, the logic will crack, and then you'll feel it. You've been lied to your whole life. If this information seemed valuable, if you want to dig deeper and uncover new layers of deception, subscribe to the channel. Like if you think people need truth, not textbook fairy tales. And write in the comments about other paradoxes of official history you'd like to learn about. Maybe together we'll gather enough threads to untangle the whole knot of lies wrapping our true history.